Now, returning to our top story, and that is the economic stimulus package about to be announced today. We're joined live by Jane Hume, Liberal Senator in charge of all economic legislation in the Upper House. Jane, thank you for your time.
Great to be with you, Annalise.
Today we're expecting $18 billion stimulus package that's well beyond the $10 billion we were all speculating about last week. Does this put any idea of a budget surplus for Australia just into the never-never?
Well, I think we should, take a step back and say that the coronavirus is, now the World Health Organization has called it what it is. It's a pandemic, and it's causing a significant economic shock in Australia. Now, we were in a very solid economic position before this. We had very low unemployment, high participation rates, low levels of welfare dependency, and a budget that was heading back to surplus. And of course, that gives us the capacity, the wriggle room to respond to a crisis like this, to a temporary economic shock in a decisive and significant way. And that's exactly what we're seeing today.
Do you think we will see a surplus again before the next election?
Well, I think that, the reason why you have a strong fiscal position, a strong budgetary position, is so that governments can respond to economic shocks like the one we're seeing from the coronavirus. And I think that the package that we're presenting today, as the Prime Minister has said, is targeted, it's proportionate, it's scalable and it's temporary. But most important, it's responsible as well. And it's focused specifically on keeping Australians in business, keeping business humming along, keep Australians employed, creating stimulus from households, and most importantly, making sure that at the end of the day, the Australian economy comes out the other side of this temporary economic shock stronger than before.
Do you think $18 billion is going to be enough to stave off recession?
Well, the good news is we're in a very strong economic position, and we have that fiscal wriggle room. We have the capacity to make the stimulus package scalable and very, very targeted. We haven't seen the end of this, the pandemic yet. We haven't seen it fully play out. We know that it's affected the tourism sectors. We know that it's affected the education sector, but it's also disrupted supply chains and created a shaken confidence in the Australian economy. This package that we're seeing today, which targets apprentices, keeping young people in jobs, which targets businesses, giving them cash flow support for those businesses that employ other Australians, and also the instant asset write-off, so supporting businesses that are investing in their own productive capacity. Those sorts of very targeted responses and proportionate responses and scalable responses are what's really important to see us come through the other side of this economic shock stronger than before.
This, the instant asset write-off you mentioned is quite interesting because that is very similar to what Labor took to the election.
Well, this has been a really successful program introduced by the coalition government and already ramped up once before. At the moment, it's available to businesses with a turnover of less than $50 million and for assets that are up to $30,000 in value. This temporary package will allow businesses with up to $500 million in turnover instantly write off and get a tax deduction for investment in assets worth up to $150,000. This is terrific. This will give businesses an opportunity to invest in, new cars, a new ute, industrial kitchen equipment, a harvester, things that they may not have thought about investing before, they can instantly get a tax deduction for, and that will bring confidence into businesses' forward planning, and of course, give them the support that they need to make those investments into productive assets.
One of the interesting things too is we've seen, in particular Matthias Cormann say a few times that the government wasn't going to engage in a cash splash. He called it reckless Rudd-Gillard style stimulus. We are seeing a lot of cash being splashed for New Start recipients and pensioners.
Well, I think that the details of that will be unveiled by the Prime Minister and the Treasurer later this morning. What's important, though, is not to directly compare the response to the GFC to the response to the coronavirus. They are very different. One is a health scare that's causing a temporary economic shock, and that's exactly what we're dealing with. We want to make sure that the Australian economy rides out that temporary economic shock and comes out on the other side stronger than it's been before. That's why we're focusing on keeping businesses humming, keeping Australians in employment, giving households that little bit of extra stimulus. But most importantly, we want to make sure that the economy comes out the other side in a better position than it was.
And Jane Hume, just finally, Bill Shorten told my colleague Laura Jays just a short time ago he thinks that the isolation measures need to be ramped up, that we should be quarantining more events, that we have a few days before we're really in a dangerous position and we should be acting now. Do you agree with him? We should be ramping up these quarantine measures?
Well, the government's acting on the best medical advice available. I think that a lot of these decisions are for state governments as well as federal governments. I think that we have responded to the coronavirus. We've been preemptive and proactive all the way through. And even though there's still more to come, I think that the government's response has been quite exceptional, and I think that most Australians feel quite comfortable and confident that the government knows what it's doing and is doing everything it possibly can based on the best medical advice.
Do you think it's unhelpful for someone like Bill Shorten to be weighing in with what's a pretty dramatic difference to what we're hearing from both sides of politics?
Oh, look, I think Bill Shorten can say what he wants. I think he's entitled to that. But I think that the vast majority of people would agree that the government's response has been not just appropriate, but has also been preemptive. And I think that people should have confidence that we're acting on the best medical advice that's available to us that isn't potentially available to Bill Shorten.
Jane Hume, thank you for your time.
Great to see you, Annalise.